Hey there, in this video we're going to learn how we can work with external files. We'll learn how to read information out of those files and how to write to the files. So to open up a file, we're going to use a command called open. Your basic syntax looks like file equals to open, and then we want to type in the name of the file we want to open. Let's make a brand new file. So I'm going to call it new.txt. And then the last thing here is going to be a command to tell it what kind of mode we want to use. If I hit Control-I, that'll open up my contextual help. And it'll show me here a reminder of how the open command works. Mostly we just need these first two arguments, the name of the file and then the mode. The mode could be, you can see down here, it could be R for reading, W for writing, A for appending. Those are the ones you'd mainly use. So since I'm making a brand new file, I want to write to the file, so I'll use W. And now that I've typed that, the file is open and I can modify it. If we go and look over here in our file browser, we can see that this 1 second ago, new.txt was created. So next thing we want to do is write to the file. Let's just do some simple for loop here. So we'll do for I in range 10. We wanted to just print this, we could do print I, that would just print it in the console, but let's say I want to put it in my file. The way I could put it in my file is I could do file.write. In fact, if we look at what kind of things we can do to files, we'll see that it's things like read them and write them. So we can read the file, which doesn't make sense when it's empty. We can write it. Here's a closely related function, write lines. So what's the difference between write and write lines? So write writes a string to our file, whereas write lines is going to write this isn't really clear here, but it writes, you give it a list and it writes everything in the list. So let me just show you both of those. If I do write I, it's going to take I and write it like a string to the file. So if I run that, well, it yells at me because I didn't do what I just said. It has to be a string, so that's simple enough. We just wrap this with str, turns our integer number into a string. We can write that string to the file. And so now if I come over here and double click to open up new.txt, oh, it doesn't have anything in it yet because I forgot a very important step. I have to tell it I'm done with the file. So when you're done with the file, you got to do file.close. Okay, so now the file is closed, and that's when it sort of depends on how Python is implemented. It may write ahead of time or it may not write until you close it, but it has to write once you close the file. You can see that here in the documentation, flush and close the file. Flush means if you haven't written yet, you need to do it now. Okay, so now if we open up new.txt, there we go. That's what we printed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You'll notice there's no new lines. If I want a new line, I have to explicitly add that to my file. So let's make that quick modification here. I want to print the string version of this, and I also want to include a new line character. I can use string concatenation as an easy way to get the new line attached to the values. So now if I run this, I have to open the file again because I'd closed it. I can print values to it, and then I can close and write it. Now if I open it up, we'll see 0 through 9. Note that if I just leave this open, I won't see it update. I have to close and reopen the file for Jupyter to show me the changes. So just be aware of that if you're playing around. So let's look now at how write lines works. Write lines is expecting to get a list of values. So we want to make a little bit of change to how this is set up. Let's make an empty list called lines. And then we'll do for line in, no, not for line in lines. What am I thinking? I already have a for loop here for I in range 10. Then I want to append to my empty list. So I'll do lines.append, and we'll append the string version of I. But we'll just leave off the new line character for now just to see what happens. Let's come up here. Let's make sure the file is open. Write to it. Close the file. And there's nothing there. What did I do? I never wrote to it. Okay, well, that makes sense. So I'm going to take here file.writeLines, and we're going to give it the list lines. So open the file, generate data for the file, write the file, close the file. And so we can see it's just like before. It went through and it wrote everything in the list. It didn't make any assumptions about new lines. If you want the new lines, you have to explicitly include them. So in the kind of code we wrote here, it made more sense to use write. There are other cases where you're building up a big list, and it's easier just to build a list and then separately write it to the file. In that case, you'd use write lines. The opposite of this is read, but before we get into read, I want to point out how awkward it is here to have these 3 different steps. Yeah, I could put them all in the same cell and only have one cell to read, but the big issue here is, what if I open the file and then I open it again and then I open it again, and I forget that I've already opened the file and I never close it? Then I can run into trouble. Because your operating system can only support a certain number of open files. The number might be kind of large. It might be kind of hard to crash your operating system just using the notebook, but if you have a program looping through a file, opening, writing, closing, and you forget the closing part, you can run into trouble pretty quickly. So the safe way to work with files is to use a statement called with. With is Python's context manager. It's kind of a fancy way of saying that it guarantees that something is true for the following code. And so what we're going to do here is with open, and we'll put in the rest of this stuff here. So we'll do new text, copy paste, with open as file. Then we can do stuff in here. And then when we leave this with block, notice we're indented here, we're inside a block, the file is guaranteed to be closed. Even if Python crashes in the meantime, it will still make sure it closes the file. So the way we should do this would be with something like for I in range 10, file.write string version of I. And we can put in those new lines. Okay, so that's the safe way to work with files. So this guarantees that the file is now closed. It opens it, does what it needs to, gets the file closed. And of course, just to verify here, close that, reopen it, we should have 1 line of text per line. Okay, so reading from the file is pretty similar. We just change the W to an R for read, and then the command there will be file.read. We got to store the value somewhere, so let's call it, say, contents equals file.read. And then if I want to look at what the contents is, we can see it was literally the string version of what's inside the file, new lines and all. We have the closely related read lines. So read will pull out the entire file as a single string. Read lines, on the other hand, pulls it out as a list. So if I run this command, now contents is supposed to be a list, and each element of the list is each line of the file, including the new lines. So then you could process it line by line. You just have to strip out the new lines. Remember, we have a string method called strip, which is good for that sort of thing. Okay, so in this video, we looked at how we can open files and work with them, reading or writing. We looked at how it's best to use the with context manager and how there's different modes to open your file. W and R. W for writing, R for reading, A for appending. You'll notice every time we wrote to our file, we completely replaced it. So write erases the file and then writes to it. It's kind of dangerous. Append will just add to the file. So if I just quickly, just to show you that, we'll make this append mode here, and I write to the file and then close it, we should see we've got a double set of stuff in it because it just added it to the end.